Good morning, Rich from Mountain Soda Garage. Today we're going to be talking about Skidoo's QRS secondary clutch. They've been putting this clutch on their mountain sleds for a number of years now, and it's a pretty good clutch. They've changed it a little bit over the years. This is a newer model, has these really big cooling fins on the front side, also the back side. If you have a 17 or an 18 Skidoo Summit, you're probably not going to have those. They're going to be a lot smaller or almost a little bit non-existent, but this is the newer style that comes on the newer sleds. This is your helix. This is what helps your snowmobile shift in and out, helps it back shift and upshift. Your rollers, which we're going to be talking about today, right on this angle right here. Then your rollers are deep down inside right here. That's the thing we're going to be talking about today, is the clutch roller. This clutch is pretty famous for breaking the rollers and having roller problems. And if you break a roller, what that's going to feel like is your snowmobile is not going to accelerate or backshift the way that it did. Suddenly it's going to start acting really weird. It might even get stuck in one gear, and the belt might just get stuck halfway in the sheaths here and not be able to move up or down. And you're going to be watching your friend's sled while you're sitting there with a broken snowmobile that you really can't do anything about on the mountain. So since these rollers break so frequently, there's some companies that have made some what they call high torque or high performance rollers. On the websites, they say they're about 40% stronger, have a higher heat tolerance than the stock rollers, and should last you a lot longer. But why are these rollers breaking? That's one of the things we want to talk about. Today we're going to be replacing our rollers with these Fett Brothers rollers. They've been making these rollers for a really long time. Pull one of these rollers out, and if you don't really know how your helix and secondary works, I'm just going to show you a little bit. So the helix comes out here. There is usually a spring in here, but I've already taken it out. So your roller is going to roll on this edge right here with this little notch here. Rolls up and down on here, your helix twists, and that's what opens and closes your secondary clutch. Allows you to shift from low gear to high gear and back, because that roller rolling back and forth on there. But what happens when you're at a standstill, your roller's going to end up about right here, and your engine's idling. If you put this in reverse, your engine's going to spin backwards, and what happens when you hit the gas with the engine spinning backward, this is going to turn like that. The roller's going to contact over here, and that's when you're going to go in reverse. You're on this flat end going in reverse because you don't want to shift up or down in reverse. That's why this notch is here, to keep this really from moving in and out. So when you go from being forward, you come to a stop right here. When you put your sled in reverse, if you hit the gas really hard, that slams over like that, and that slams into the roller. And it can hit really hard, especially if you're hitting the gas really hard in reverse. If you're trying to get unstuck or something and you hit the gas really hard, that slamming right there is probably what's breaking the roller. If you're going to hit the gas really hard in reverse, hit it really softly first, so that's going to move over there and contact there before you hit the gas hard in reverse, if you're going to have to do that for some reason. So that's probably why the rollers are breaking. Probably, I doubt it's because these are just failing because they get worn. I mean, if they've been in there for a long time, maybe, but probably that hammering effect when you're hitting it in reverse really hard is probably damaging the roller, that it fails under normal use. There's only a few brands that really sell these high performance, high torque rollers. We're going to show you a couple of broken rollers, and then we'll show you how to replace these. Okay, so now when you're out mountain riding, you want to be able to have fun all day. You don't want any problems with your rollers. So let's just take a look at what some broken rollers may look like. Here's one. You're looking down inside the clutch. Here's the helix. Here's a little angle that it rolls on. You see the two broken edges there. Kind of ruin your day. Let's look at another one. This one's not necessarily broken, but it's all pitted and charred. That's really going to affect how your roller rolls up and down that angle on the helix, and it's not going to be as efficiently upshifting and backshifting, so you're going to want to replace something that looks like that. Another broken one, obviously broken in half, the other part's sitting down inside there. So another one broken, just the parts sitting out on the table. But let's look at some options on what you can do and where you can go to find some of these if you want to replace them. So first, if you're in the U.S., there's a couple places in the U.S. that make them. One is G-Boost Technologies. They build a lot of parts for side-by-sides. This happens that the same clutch and the same rollers are using some side-by-side. So they make these really nice Extreme Rhino roller kit. They make one that's called just a Rhino roller kit. It's about half the price of this one. This one's $70. The other one's, I think, like half, 34-ish or something. But I would highly recommend, if you're going to spend the money and go to all the work to replace these, get the really nice high-performance ones. There's another company, like I talked about, Fett Brothers have been making these for probably longer than anybody out there. Really good roller. They know what they're doing. They've made these for a long time. It comes in a little kit with these parts right here. It's really simple to buy them on Amazon. I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon, shipped straight to my house. I get them in a couple of days. I think this was even on Amazon Prime, so I think I got them in like 1 or 2 days. So those are probably your two options if you're living in the U.S. Now, there's a number of like smaller aftermarket companies that sell Fett Brothers rollers and some of the other aftermarket manufactured rollers, but those are really the two main places that I see are actually making the rollers. If you're in Canada, there's this company called High Torque Rollers. They've been making these for a while, also in Canada. They make them for a few different clutches. Make sure you get the one for the QRS secondary clutch. But also, I just like, if you're in the U.S., it's easier to ship. If you're in the U.S. buying U.S. stuff and having to come across the border. And the same goes for Canada. If you're in Canada, shipping from the U.S. to Canada can sometimes be a little messy coming across the border, but these are so small, it shouldn't be a problem. So that's your Canada option. Anyway, those are the places where you can get these. Let's go now. We'll show you how to take the secondary clutch out, and then we'll show you how to replace them. Okay, now in this video, I'm mostly just focusing on replacing the rollers. If you want to know how to take this whole shaft out and put it back in, I have another video called QRS clutch and jack shaft removal. And that video goes through the process of taking this whole section out and putting it back in, the tools you need and what you need to do that. I'm not going to cover that in this video. I didn't want to combine the two things. This makes the video too long, and a lot of people who are watching this have done that before. So anyway, if you QRS clutch removal, look for that video if you want to know how to take this out and put it back in. So in this video, we're going to cover how to replace the rollers. There's kind of two ways you can do that. You can take this whole system all the way apart, taking this bearing off, taking the moving sheath off, and replace the rollers that way. Or you can replace the rollers by just pulling the helix out and replacing the rollers from this side. It's not quite as easy. You don't get it to inspect all the surfaces, but you can still do it that way. You can do it whichever way you want. I'm going to go over both ways to do it, and you can kind of decide what you want to do it for when you replace yours. So let's go over to the bench. We'll replace the rollers in this clutch. Again, I'll show you both ways to do it. And all right, now if you want to get your jack shaft bearing off your jack shaft on your QRS clutch, it's really difficult. And Skidoo's been making it this way for I think since the 2008 model when the XP 800 came out. And it's a royal pain in the ass. I remember when this first came out, taking this apart, everyone was so frustrated that the jack shaft and the secondary clutch were all one piece, and it was really just a pain to get out of there. So there aren't really a lot of options to pull your jack shaft bearing off there. There's this one, the CT Power Sports makes this. It's a nice unit. I think it's like 50 bucks. It fits on your clutch like this. You got to screw all these screws in individually, the nuts on these shafts, to pull the bearing up this way, and it pulls off. You only have to move the bearing maybe a half an inch, 3/4 of an inch before it pops off and you lift it up. You don't have to do it very far. That's one way to do it. There's another one. This is another one that I saw for sale on eBay, 90 bucks. A little bit easier because it's got a center screw in the middle that pushes down the end of your jack shaft. So you're only screwing one screw in. If you have a bunch of friends that got Skidoos and you all want to go in on these tools, it makes it a lot simpler, a lot more cost effective than if you're just going to buy a $90 tool on your own to do one clutch. So I'm going to show you the way I did it. I just used some standard garage home tools with a couple things I bought at Ace Hardware in order to make my clutch puller. And so let's go over to the bench. I'll show you what I did. Okay, so I got my jack shaft and my clutch in a vise here. This is kind of your standard Harbor Freight bearing race puller. They come in a kit now, and almost all of them have these holes in the bottom you can put a screw through. This is just some 3/8 inch really long screw that I bought at, you can buy this at Home Depot, you can buy it at Lowe's, you can buy it at Ace Hardware. And I have like a 18-inch piece here, goes all the way up here. And this is just a regular balancer, like a harmonic balancer puller that I got also, I think, from Harbor Freight as well. And I got this whole thing set up just like this. It's pretty easy to do to make this. You just need a few parts. Put my 3-inch drill in there, and as you can see, as I pull on this, there, it popped off. My bearing is now off. Super simple way to do it. Now I've got this in a vise. It's being held by the jack shaft. I have my tool on it, my spring compressor tool. I've got all 4 of the bolts out of the backside that hold the helix in place. Now this helix, if you've never taken one of these apart before, it's held under spring pressure, so you don't want to take those off without the right tool to undo this. So you're going to, until all the spring pressure's off it. Now if you want to make sure you get this back in the right spot so you're not guessing, you're going to want to mark your clutch. So we're going to mark this here, and we're going to mark this here. So we know when this goes back on, this is going to go right there. You don't have to do this if you know the way it goes, but if you're new to this, you want to make sure you get your helix, because it can go one of two ways. The one way it's going to work, the other way you put it in, it's not going to work. Or your helix is going to be rubbing metal on metal if you put it in the wrong direction. So you can see my rollers down in here. They seem to be in pretty good shape, but we're going to replace them off, because that allows you to take this movable sheath off, and then your rollers, you can see are right down in there, and there's a little pin that holds the roller screw bolt in. This is the roller screw that goes through the roller pivots on that, and there's a pin right in this hole right here. You got to punch that out in order to get that screw out. So we're going to put this in the vise, make sure your jack shaft's protected from any teeth if you're going to lock it in a vise like this. Then we're going to put this little punch, needs to be about 80 thousandths round in order to fit down this hole. And that just comes out like that. This is the pin that holds this Torx bit in place. Now, if you don't have a little punch like this that fits in the hole, I actually had to make this one. It was just a little bit too big. Again, like I said, you want something that's about 80 thousandths of an inch. And so I actually turned this one down to 80 thousandths. Now I'm going to show you how I did that. I chucked it in my electric drill, and then I had a nice sander like this. You could probably use something else if you wanted to, but turn that on. And then I turned my drill up against it like that, and I was able to shave this down to a pretty even 80 thousandths all the way across there. It actually worked pretty good. So if you don't have one, if you need to make one, that's an easy way to make it. You know, before you take this out, since this screw on this end has a hole through it where the pin goes through, you want to make sure when you tighten this back down, you can't torque this to any certain torqueness, because then it could pull the hole that goes in your screw. You might turn it past the hole that's through here and you won't be able to get your pin in. So what you want to do, you want to mark this right exactly so you can tighten this back in this exact same spot that it came out of before you remove that pivot bolt. That's out. Roller falls out the bottom. That roller is actually in pretty good shape. I don't see any damage to it. And then our pivot, you can see how it's got that hole through it where the pin goes through it to hold this pivot bolt in place. Okay, now these come with a little thrust washer that come with these heavy duty rollers. Now I'm just going to put a little dab of grease right on there. And that's going to help the washer just stick to that in place, because I got to drop it down in there and I got to put the pin through here and through the washer and then the roller, and I don't want the pin falling out. So I'm going to hold on to this with these, drop this down in here, kind of hold it to about where the hole is. Then I'm going to put my bolt through the hole, feed it through the washer and the roller, and then we're going to screw this into place. Now we're going to turn this upside down so we can put the pin back in from the other side. The locking pin is going to go right back in that hole right there. Now if you're not sure how lined up, you can put this in there. You can tighten this bolt a little bit just until you're close to my mark. My mark is about right around here. There we go. Now we got our punch that we punched our pin out with. It fits down all the way through pretty nicely, so that we should be able to get our pin all the way down through there. Now to get the pin started, I've taken it to the grinder and I've tapered that a little bit. That just helps the pin get started in the hole. And hold that there. This is an aluminum shaft. I don't really want to be pounding on this with steel on steel because it will mushroom that head a little bit. So I just use this aluminum shaft and then pound that as far in as I can go with that, and then punch it all the way in with that. Okay, now we're in. Our high torque rollers are in. Now we just got to put the sheath back on, press that bearing back on, and we're good to put it all back together. Okay, now we're at the shop. We're going to press our bearing back on our shaft. Now if you look at this shaft, it's got a little lip right here. You want to make sure when you press this on, you press it all the way down so it sits against that lip right there, so it gets the bearing in the correct place. So we're going to slide our bearing over this. When you do this, make sure you have your movable sheath on here. One of the first times I did this 10 or 12 years ago, I forgot to put my movable sheath back on, press the bearing on, and realized I had to pull it all apart. And bearings on, maybe a little lubrication so that doesn't stick when it's going on. And we're just gonna press this down here. Okay, now you can see our bearing down there. Just pressing it on into place. Pretty simple. Gonna seat it right down the bottom there, right against the lip. Just a little pressure on it. Don't want to push it too hard because it could break something. There we go, our bearings onto place and seated where it's supposed to be. Now we can go install the jack shaft and clutch back in our machine. Okay, now we're gonna put our helix back together into our secondary clutch. This so you kind of get an idea of how the secondary clutch works. So I don't have the spring in this right now, but what's gonna happen, snowmobile shifts from low gear right here, this is idling in low gear, as it shifts out to high gear, the helix is going to roll on the rollers and kind of twist a little bit like that. It twists the helix and the secondary sheath that's movable, and they both go in and out like that, from low gear to high gear and back to low gear again. That's kind of how that works. And then depending on what spring you have in there is also going to affect how that works. But we're going to pull this apart, we're going to put the spring in it, and then we're going to put it all back together. We're going to put this back in the machine. So another thing I'm going to put in here, when I put this back together, there's these little Teflon spacers. They go on each end of the spring like that, and one right there. That allows these to move more smoothly. If you didn't have those on there, as that helix twists in and out, as the spring twists in and out, it kind of grinds into the aluminum back here in here and doesn't move and doesn't shift as smoothly. And also where the spring goes here on the secondary clutch, it kind of grinds. You can feel it grind. It doesn't move as smoothly. So if you put these Teflon spacers in here, your clutch is going to shift in and out a little more smoothly. One goes on the helix side, and one's going to go on the clutch side. Going to put that in there, and then remember we had drew our line here and over here. We're going to line that up so our helix ends up in the right space. We're going to put our tool back in. That's going to allow us to compress our helix. Remember, this goes on here. This goes on here. And this just allows us to tighten this down so you can get your bolts in. Now, remember earlier in the video I talked to you about, these are the Torx bolts that go into the back of the helix here. If you ever want to be able to swap this helix or spring out again on the mount or in your garage without having to pull a shaft out, I highly recommend you exchange these Torx bits out on the back here for a hex head bolt like this. I got these at Ace Hardware. They're called I think a flange metric bolt. They have a built-in washer on them. This is a M8 by 1.25 thread. Easy to get. I think they're 85 cents or maybe $1 a piece. And when you put these on, I would put a good amount of blue Loctite on them, because this is one thing you don't want coming out while you're riding. I've seen people who's had their helix come apart while they're riding, and it makes for not a very fun day. I'm going to show you something else when you put this back together that you're going to want to be aware of. This helix, both this sheath and this sheath, are balanced as a pair. And they have a little arrow. See that arrow there? There's another arrow on the other side over here. See that arrow right there? Both those arrows you want, I actually drew a black line across where my arrows are. You want those lined up, because that's how this is balanced here. And then when you put your bolt back in, put our bolt in like that. And then we're going to put in all the bolts. We'll torque them down to proper torque, and then we'll put this back in the machine. All right, now before we put all this back together, I'm just going to show you how to do this without having to pull the jack shaft out and the bearing off the back. Personally, I like to do it that way if I've never had the clutch apart before. That way I can inspect all the surfaces really well, look for cracks, look for wear. But if you want to do this a little bit more quickly, not have to take everything apart, you can do this with the clutch just like this. You can even do it on your machine if you can get the helix and spring out. And so what we need to do, we're going to use our Same little punch. When we punch this, we're going to be punching it from this side, and if we don't want to bugger up the threads and stuff on here, I like to use a brass hammer. So if I accidentally hit it on here, it's not going to damage these threads. And so what we're going to do, we're going to punch the pin out from this side through the back over here, and we're going to have to grab it on this back side. And if you're doing this in your machine, you got to be really careful because you don't want to drop that pin down your engine compartment because you'll probably never find it again. So we'll just go through that process real quick. It only takes a few minutes. Okay, now we're going to see our little pinholes right here. We're going to put our punch in there. And we're just going to, so we don't want to hit the hammer against this, risk damaging that. So if you got a punch that's longer than this, it could be helpful. But I'm just going to hold my punch there. And since I got my brass hammer, just going to tap that so it starts moving a little bit. Once we start tapping it, we can come over here to this side and we can actually see our pin coming through the back side. And we're going to grab our pin with this little needle nose vice grips because we don't want that pin falling out. So now we've got the vice grips on the pin, so we can punch it all the way through and the vice grips will hold on to it. Now you don't want to clamp onto it really hard and smash the pin, but just enough that you're going to clamp onto it. Or if you have a buddy with an extra set of hands, you can have them hold it with some needle nose pliers or something. But we're going to come back over here with our punch. Just lightly tap that. Now remember, that pin is about 30 millimeters long. So if you have it with vice grips, you might, once it gets out a little ways, you're going to have to probably reposition your vice grips. My pin is out. There's the pin on the vice grips. We're going to pull out this again like we did when we did it the other way. Pull our roller out, put the roller back in, reinstall the roller pin there, and then we're going to install the pin we took out back into the hole right here, back into this hole right here, and we'll just punch that pin back through this direction. So now that I've got my pin started in the hole a little, I'm just going to tap it as far in as I can with my little aluminum punch. Then I'm going to get a flat-headed punch like this. Just kind of tap it in the rest of the way till it's flush with the aluminum. I'm going to punch it in just a little bit farther with my little punch that I took it out with. We now have our rollers replaced without having to pull the bearing and everything off the back. Now, like I said before, if you can get your helix off with this in the machine like this, you can replace your rollers with the clutch in the machine. But it's a lot easier to do, like I said before, if you replace this Torx bit that comes on the back of your helix in here. If you replace that with the hex-headed bolts like this, it's a lot easier to get your helix off, and it's a lot easier to do this with this in the machine. So that's how you can do this without having to pull the bearing and everything apart. A little bit easier, a little less time involved, but like I said, I like to be able to inspect all the surfaces, everything on both sides of the clutch. Okay, Skidoo here's all finished. Jack shaft and the secondary clutch are all buttoned up, belts on, runs, everything seems to work well. Now all we gotta do is go run it. We have enough snow here in Utah where we can probably go do a little trail ride. Snow's coming and this thing's ready for it. Got a few other things we're gonna be putting on this coming up, so stay tuned and look for our next videos. Can hardly wait for the season to get started. Make sure you share the videos, like them, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time on Mountain Slaughter Garage.